Let freedom ring this afternoon at 2 with Sean Hannity, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So as Mike Scott was reporting, former National Security Advisor to President Trump, General Michael Flynn, expected to plead guilty this morning. He's going to be in court within the hour, it's being reported, to lying to the FBI about his post-election discussions with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. Specifically, Flynn is accused of falsely claiming he had not asked Russia's ambassador to the U.S. last December 29th to refrain from escalating the situation in response to sanctions that the United States had imposed against Russia that same day. He also allegedly lied to the FBI, saying he didn't recall the Russian ambassador subsequently telling him that Russia had chosen to moderate its response to those sanctions as a result of his, meaning Flynn's, request.
So basically, you don't lie to the feds. Denny Hastert could have told him that.
Yeah, well, right. Many people could have told him that. I think something he should have known, otherwise sophisticated individual. So this will probably be spun to be evidence of some sort of Russian collusion, but doesn't really strike me as if I'm lying about the request I made that was honored, unless you can connect other dots. I don't know that this extends beyond General Flynn and General Flynn doing some freelancing here prior to even the inauguration of the President of the United States, right? We're talking about December 29th. So about a month before he was inaugurated. So we'll see if Trump tweets about that. He has been busy on Twitter this week. I would argue some legitimate spaces on some legitimate issues like the acquittal of Kate Steinle's murder yesterday, properly calling that a miscarriage of justice, which the president did.
A disastrous verdict, he said, yeah.
But some of his other tweeting this week that embroiled him in controversy.
You mean the anti-Muslim videos?
Well, for example, yeah. Or the back and forth with Joe Scarborough and resuscitating this story about a dead intern in Scarborough's legislative office and insinuating that Scarborough may somehow be complicit in her death, and that's been kind of fully investigated, and there's nothing to suggest anything of the sort. Now, this is why we bring Scott Adams, the Dilbert cartoon creator, on, because at first blush, I find that stuff a little silly, counterproductive, stepping on other important issues that should be discussed, that the president should be using his bully platform and his bully Twitter account to advance, like, I don't know, tax cuts. But you got to go to the Trump whisperer to fully understand the communication style and impact of the President of the United States, and that's why we have Scott Adams on. Scott Adams, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So what about the tweeting earlier this week from the president that got him into such trouble, got him a severe rebuke from the British Prime Minister about those Britain First anti-Muslim videos, some of which were fake. Does that make sense?
Well, make sense is a big term.
Okay.
Yeah, let me start off by saying I don't think I would have done any of those tweets.
Right.
and you could certainly draw your own judgment about the ethics or morality of any of it. But in terms of the pattern that we've seen, he's always willing to draw attention where he wants you to focus, even if it's provocative the way he does it. So if he wants you to think there's a problem with immigration and he's the toughest voice against it, tweeting those things that make us just think about it, even if what we're thinking about is, hey, this video is fake, and hey, why are you retweeting this horrible group? Those questions probably are smaller in our minds than the fact that the images themselves are scary. So long after we stop, thinking about the appropriateness of the tweets, because there will be 5 more inappropriate tweets to divert us tomorrow, we will remember those images.
Yeah, but
so you could certainly make a case that it's not fair to try to influence people on such an irrational basis, but it definitely works.
But he got a rare rebuke from, the Prime Minister of UK, Theresa May, because he retweeted those anti-Muslim videos, which, I mean, even the Dutch government has confirmed that the guy who's beating up the guy on the crutches isn't an immigrant. He was born in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I think even Press Secretary Sanders admitted they may not be real videos. Mm-hmm. One of the things that people who don't spend a lot of time on Twitter don't fully understand is how perfectly Twitter compatible the president is, even if it's incompatible with politics and maybe even clean living in general. Twitter is sort of its own universe in which forwarding things of dubious source is pretty routine. Now, for a normal person, it would be nothing. I've done it. I can't tell you how many times I've tweeted something only to have somebody else in public say, "You idiot, that's a fake video," or "That was an old one, it's not new," that sort of thing. It's a very common thing. Now, the president is probably one of the most, I would say, effective tweeters in the world, but he tweets like a regular person in the sense that he makes the same mistakes that everybody does. He spells things wrong. He tweets a bad video. But keep in mind that he's working with how people feel. That's the level that he's working on. And so he can make a few mistakes that we can say, "My God, why did you do that? That's so provocative." But what we're thinking about is the topic of the tweet. And so he's willing to take some punches in terms of his accuracy and even his character, but he still makes you think where he wants you to think.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the idea of like even those fake videos of alleged Muslim attacks. Okay, so those are fake, but the underlying issue is a real issue, and so you suggest that it still has you kind of thinking about it, even if you intellectualize that those are fake, and those aren't actual incidents, but that doesn't mean there aren't actual incidents, and thus it doesn't mean that I shouldn't be concerned about that issue.
Yeah, it's that unique approach he takes, and I'm saying unique to keep it as unbiased as possible, that he's often directionally accurate, meaning that the thing he's persuading you toward is, at least by a Republican point of view, a greater good. So if the greater good is better border security, he's willing to take a little bit of imprecision to get there.
What do you think about his tweeting on the topic that's really dominating the news, generally speaking, for the last many weeks now, and ever since Harvey Weinstein, and that's the kind of the culture of sexual harassment, sexual assault in media, entertainment, and politics, and the specific example, of course, this week being Matt Lauer, despite the fact that some argue that the president has sort of exposure on the issue and he should just keep quiet about it.
Yeah, you wouldn't have expected that. I would have expected him to be quiet on that. But I think the play here is that he's consistent in jabbing his critics whenever he can on whatever topic he can. So I think most of the people that he's commented on are people who have been big critics of his. And that makes a difference because he tries to keep that consistency between praising the people who are good to him and attacking every single time, whenever he can, the people who are bad to him. We saw also a tweet about Lindsey Graham, who had, I think, was supporting him and saying, stop calling the president a kook, even though Lindsey Graham had in the past. So we see him effusively praising and calling out people who do things he likes and going after consistently every time people who criticize him. And what that does, persuasion-wise, is it creates the largest gap, the biggest contrast between doing what he wants and doing what he doesn't want. So, as long as he keeps that contrast in your mind, it gives you pause. You think, well, I'd rather get the praise than the condemnation because it's pretty brutal when he goes after you. Everybody's thinking about your problem if he tweets about it. So that gives him a little bit of leverage going forward.
So we've been, trying to predict the next person who's going to be called out for bad behavior. Who do you think it's going to be? Whether in the media world, Hollywood,
and maybe a cartoonist. It's about time there's a reckoning in the cartoonist industry.
Yeah, Yeah, don't bring the curse my way. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't name somebody who hadn't been named by an actual accuser. But what is clear at this point is that the seal is broken, and I think that's obvious to everyone. And we've gone from a point where women primarily are going to say, "No, I don't want to, make any waves because that's just going to be bad for me in a variety of ways," to a point where they say, "Well, here it is. I got my opening. I waited 10 years, but here it is. I'm gonna jump in because this is the time." So I don't think there's any end of this. I think this is a forever situation.
I mean, not that this is the subject of lampooning, but I wouldn't really call Dilbert lampooning. It was sort of a mirror. Maybe there needs to be like a special edition Dilbert on the corporate culture of the 21st century, or 2017, even more specifically.
Yeah, that's a tough one because as soon as you get into that territory, it polarizes the audience. I try to write stuff that the entire audience will like, not half of them. So that's a tough topic.
Okay, that's fair. I'm making a mental note about kind of business model. Do something people like. Got it.
Not just half of the audience.
All right, that's very helpful. That's Scott Adams, creator of the Dilbert cartoon strip, and of course, as we call him, the Trump Whisperer. Scott, thanks for joining us. Always appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen,